This time I'm going to show you how to make this really cute but very simple cosmetic bag that has handles on it. Something that you could resize and something that you could make in so many different types of fabric. So this brightly coloured one is actually made from corduroy, a baby cord, which is something that you probably wouldn't expect to use for a bag, but it's absolutely perfect. It feels velvety soft, and I love the colours on this. It's quite retro and it's quite 1970s. The one that I'm going to show you in the video in just a second, I actually made from a wynciette or a flannelette fabric. Normally you'd use this for baby blankets and baby clothes and things like that because it's incredibly soft, but I just thought, why not use it for a bag? It's a really lovely tactile feeling to it, but it looks great as well, so why not? I made one in a live stream that you may have seen already, and this one I used a loose weave linen mix, and I've combined that with a cotton. So, you know, it doesn't really matter the type of fabric you use. Experiment. Maybe you have some faux leather at home, maybe you have cork. They would work really well. If you have canvas, if you have denim, if you've got a looser weave of fabric like my linen, then you will definitely need some kind of stabilizer on the back of it to help it to stop it from shifting. I've used H630, a Valaiseline product, with these because it gives it a firmness, but it's still quite a soft bag. I think it makes a difference. I wouldn't just use cotton on its own. So again, they are very simple to make. They don't take up very much fabric. So if you've had the odd fat quarters, or if you have a pack of 10-inch squares that you're not sure what to do with them, then you'll easily be able to make a bag out of a few of those. So I said it's quite simple, and let me show you how. So this is the bottom section of the bag, and I've got two pieces of each. This is the section that's going to go over the top, and these are my handles, the two of those, and this is the lining. I may need to trim the lining to size once I've put this together. So the first thing I'm going to do is to fuse fleece onto the wrong side of the outer pieces. I don't think the handles are going to need it on this one because the fabric's going to be quite firm enough when I put 4 layers of those together. So let's pop this on here, and I'm using an H630 Valaiseline product, which will give the bag a little bit of firmness, but it's still quite soft, and it's easy to work with as well. So I can use plenty of steam with this one. It doesn't tend to go lumpy or bobbly, and try not to get the iron onto the gluey side of it. So that's 1 and 2, and then do the same with the top pieces. And then we'll cut these out. Now you can make the bag in different sizes. Literally just increase the size of each piece and make the handles longer if you wish. You don't have to have the handles on there, so that could be a different look for you as well. Try making it in something like an oilcloth or a laminated fabric. That would make a nice wash bag. But it's a nice size for storage as well, so it could be for your hair bits and pieces, or some of your sewing notions, your bobbins and spools maybe, or somewhere to keep your fabric clips. So have a play with different types of fabric and different sizes. It's a very simple bag to make, and it's very easy to adjust it as well. Okay, almost there with these. And then, because I didn't go right up to the edge with my iron, I'm going to do that now. So just literally over the end pieces. It doesn't really matter if it doesn't stick completely like glue all over, because we're going to be sewing this anyhow. And then while I'm here with the iron on, I'm going to just make up the straps. So just like making a piece of binding, and I know you've seen me do this so many times before if you've seen my other videos, I'm taking the long piece to the centre, so folding the long sides together and creasing the centre. If your fabric wants to fight back a little bit, there's no reason why you can't give it a spray of best press or a spray starch to encourage it to crease, which is exactly what we want it to do. So I'm folding the long edge to the centre, slightly narrower than I'd normally use from a bag, but this is only a small bag. Opposite side to the centre. And then we'll fold the whole thing in half and press again. So lots of pressing involved. And then when I finish this, I'm going to sew down both sides and do the same with the second piece of fabric. And we'll take the bottom sections of the bag, and I'm going to measure 2.5 inches from each side, which is about 6 centimetres, and place the strap facing downwards. I'm just going to trim away that extra little bit of fleece there. And we'll have a clip in that. You can pin it if you wish. And then without twisting the strap, we're going to measure the same from this side. So they're the same distance. I think this one just needs to move across a little bit more. And the same with the opposite side. So make sure that if your fabric's directional, it's facing the right way. So I'm going to measure against the first piece here to make sure they're in the same position. The same on this side. And then I'm just going to sew across these ends just to hold this in place. So I'm sewing within the seam allowance. Seam allowance, I'm just using the edge of my foot, which is around about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. It really doesn't matter too much if it's not exactly that measurement, as long as you're consistent. So the same seam allowance all the way around. So there's the two bottom parts of the bag. Now we're going to sew the top part right sides together over the top. So I'm just lining up the edges. I find the fabric kind of clings to the other piece, so I'm not worried about pinning this section. Of course, feel free to pin if you find that easier to do. So when you come to the handles, make sure that they are at a right angle, because it's very easy to kind of push them out of line as you're sewing. So that's how we're looking. And then I'm going to start underneath these straps, and I'm just going to top stitch across each side of the seam. So I can lengthen the stitch now. I'm actually on a 3 on this machine. And just sew, and stitching the bottom first, pushing the seam downwards, secures the strap facing upwards. And then I'm just going to sew across the top section as well. So I'll move the strap out of the way and sew. You don't need to do this. I just think it looks professional. It gives a really shop-bought finish when you see a little bit of top stitching like that, and it does make the seam look nice and smart. So that's how we're looking at the side. Then we'll do exactly the same with the second side. And then we can cut the lining pieces. So it's only slightly too long, but I need 2 pieces of lining to the same size as the 2 pieces of outer fabric. And then it's time to put the zip in. Zips too long, I prefer to buy them that way. I find it more economical, and it also means that I can move the slider out of the way as I'm sewing. This one is particularly long, so I'm just going to chop the end off there. So place this right sides together, so in other words the slider here is facing downwards, and we're going to sew straight down the centre of the zip tape and through the outer fabric. So I'm just going to move the needle on my machine over to the left hand side by using the stitch width button on my machine. Most domestic sewing machines you'll be able to have that function. And sew. And I do it this way, that I know I have explained before, because I find it more accurate, so it may take a little bit more time to do this in 2 parts. But I can see where I've sewn now. If I was to sandwich the lining, the zip in between the lining and the outer fabric, I wouldn't be able to see where I was sewing, so I wouldn't know I was straight down the centre of the zip tape. So now I'm going to place the second side over the top, and I can see my stitch line here, so I'm going to sew over the same line and just making sure that the edges of fabric are meeting here. And again, I find it easier not to pin, particularly on smaller items like this. By the time you put your pins in and then manoeuvred around them, you could have made a couple of bags. So that's how we're looking. And then we'll do the same with the opposite side of the zip. So we'll fold it out of the way. So slider side up again, so it's right sides together to the opposite side of the bag. Line these edges up. I'm going to sew from the zip side. And again, sew straight down the zip tape. So it's a very simple way, I think, of putting a zip in. And the zip is going to go straight into the side seams of this one. You could add a couple of little fabric tabs to the end of the zip if you didn't want that to happen. I do have other videos where I've done that. But this one, because it's quite a small bag, the zip's going to go straight down. So let's pop the second half of the lining right sides together over the zip. So the zip is sandwiched again in between the 2 pieces. Line up the edges of the fabric, line up the edges of the fabric with the zip, and we'll sew straight over that same line. Then we're going to open it up, so we have one side with the outer, one side with the lining, and I'm going to do a top stitch down each side of the zip. And this again will help to keep the lining and the outer fabric away from the zip. So I'm just pulling this away so it's nice and flat, and it looks neat as well. So a line of stitching here and a line of stitching here. And again, I'm not pushing the fabric under, I'm pulling it away from the zip. So it sits nice and flat on each side. And turn it around and sew back down the second side. Nice if you had maybe a contrast thread. I could have used an orangey colour on here to really make it stand out. So now I can cut off the ends of the zip. Make sure that this one's open before you cut it off. And my lining seems to have grown a little bit there. I'm going to trim that down as well. And then just with the end of the zip that's open, I'm going to just put a few hand stitches in there to close it, which makes it a little bit easier as you're putting the bag together. So right in the seam allowance, so I don't need to unpick this again afterwards. And just a couple of stitches like so. Right, now we can put the bag together. So make sure the zip is open. We're going to fold the right sides together, and I'm going to fold the handles inwards so I'm not sewing over them. And the lining pieces right sides together. I want to line up these seams at the side because it's going to be quite noticeable if they don't match. Nobody notices a perfectly matching seam, only a sewer, and again this side. But if your seams don't match, then it does tend to stand out quite a lot. I'm not going to pin the rest of it, I don't think it needs it. Push you in. And then we're going to sew all the way around the edge, but leave a turning gap in one side. It doesn't matter which side, I'm going to choose the bottom. When it comes to sewing where the zip is here, you're going to push that towards the lining side, and that's how it disappears into the seam. It kind of wants to go that way, so it's quite easy to do. So in you go. And around we go. So I'm just coming up to that seam. I'm just making sure again that it's matching. And take out any pins as you sew. Let's see the end of that one. Make sure you don't sew over pins. Not a good habit. We are going to square the base of this as well. So we'll do that in just a second. You may hear doggy footprint. She's right between my legs down here. Hi, puppy. Okay, we just sew all the way around. And don't forget your turning gap in the bottom. That's one thing I do quite a lot. Forget the turning gap. I pinned from the other side, that's why I couldn't see them. Take those out now. And sew. Now to make the corners square, I'm going to pull them apart so the side seam is sitting over the base seam, and hold that with a pin. Then I'm going to measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from where I finished sewing, so not from the edge of the fabric but from the end of the seam. And with a ruler like this, you can line up the mark so that you know you've got an equilateral triangle. And I'm just going to use a Sharpie to mark on the fleece side because I found that my erasable ink pens won't mark it. Do test that first. It's not advisable really to use Sharpies on fabric, but you wouldn't see my markings. So again, let's squish that down 1 inch from the edge of the seam, making sure that's nice and square, and we'll mark. Then I'm going to sew straight across that line. I normally squish the seams in opposite directions. Not too important, but take out the pin, and we're going to snip, whoops, straight across where I've sewn. And we'll do the same on all 4 corners. So when you're coming to the base seam here, I'm squishing it in the opposite direction again, but in the same direction as the first one, so the seam's sitting flat in one direction. And let's snip that off. And then we'll do the same with the lining pieces. So this is how we're looking. This is why we needed to leave the zip open, because now I'm going to put my hand in there and pull the whole thing through. And push out the corners at the edge of the zip. And so the zip again is disappearing into the seam. That's the way that I wanted this one to work. And I'll push out those bottom corners while we're here. Just got a thread there that needs snipping. And sew the opening closed. Just put your fingers inside and roll the seam allowance inside. And I'm just going to sew straight across. Now, if you wanted to make that invisible, if this is something that you're going to sell or you're going to gift, you could hand sew that with a ladder stitch. Or it does, to be honest, be a little bit less noticeable if you leave the turning gap in the side seam. So leave that up to you. So let's push the lining inside the bag. May need another final press. I don't know where these threads seem to come from, but there's always some. It needs snipping away. So right down into the corners. And that is my little bag finished. So when I first made these, my husband said that they'd be lovely for the grandchildren. And they are really nice little kind of child-size handbags. But they're ideal for keeping your makeup, they're ideal for keeping your notions in. Just want to show you as well, one that I made in the live stream, I used a wider bottom for the base. So whereas with the base of these, I measured 1 inch from the corner and then cut. On this one, I measured 1.5 inches, and you can see the difference in the shape that it's made. So they're both the same size, they're both using the same size of fabrics, but one of them has a wider base, but it means that the sides come in, and this one is a little bit squarer. So experiment with different types of fabric and different sizes, and again, different sizes of bases create different kind of looks. So I hope you enjoy the tutorial. They're so simple and, as you can see, so quick to make. I'm sure you're going to make lots of them. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.